Okay, kicking off today's event. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us as always. I think it's okay to start. And today's event is we've got great signups for tonight. So thank you all so much for signing up and taking time out of your busy day and your busy research cycle. My name is Scott, and on behalf of everyone at Bentham Science Publishers, welcome and thanks again for making time for this event today. We hope it's useful for you. It's an important topic. Selecting a journal, it's a pain point for many researchers. And who better to help guide us through this process than someone who has published more than 300 papers as an author or co-author. He himself is a journal editor, so he knows it from both sides. My colleague, Dr. Gareth Dyke. Gareth, how are you today?
I'm good. I'm very good. Thank you very much, Scott. Everything is absolutely fantastic here. I'm in the same time zone as you for once, so I can finally say good evening, Scott. How are things in Tokyo? How's it going?
Everything's great here. It's a nice, crisp autumn or early winter day. And it's great that you're in the same time zone as me now, basically. So that doesn't usually happen. And no matter where our audience are, no matter where you are in the world, that might be morning, afternoon, evening for you, let us know where you are. Let us know if you care to, what kind of research you're doing. And yeah, introduce yourself in the chat. Hopefully you can access the chat. Let me just check now.
I think so. Yep, I checked. And yeah, let us
Great.
know. We'd love to know where you're from. We'd love to know a bit about you, maybe your subject area, and also feedback during the event. You can put any comments that you like either into the chat or use the Q&A, the Zoom webinar Q&A, and we'll have lots of time a little bit later on in our event for questions. Scott.
We've got guests from, oh, looks from all kinds of places. Ethiopia, from India, from Ghana. Fantastic. Thanks, everyone. Feel free to introduce yourselves. And yes, if you have any questions for Dr. Dyke, we love questions from researchers. We love hearing from you. We love knowing what your pain points are. Helps us to be better in the training that we provide. And so feel free to ask your questions. As Gareth said, there's a Q&A box there. Hopefully you can access that. Feel free to type your questions anytime, and we will handle your questions at the end. If we get a tough question, and if you're somehow able to stump Gareth, which doesn't happen often because he's very knowledgeable, but if you manage to stump Gareth, you win a prize. No, I'm just joking. We will try to reach out to you after the event and get an answer for you. So we welcome your questions, and thanks everyone for joining us today.
Absolutely fantastic. We're going to be talking about selecting a journal and submitting your papers effectively. So, some ideas around journal selection and the submission process. We know these are big problems for researchers. We talk about this a lot. But let's begin, Scott, by just giving our audience a few tidbits of information about Bentham Science, our host for this evening.
Yes, on behalf of Bentham Science Publishers, our sponsors today, thank you all for joining. If you are not familiar with Bentham, Bentham is a leading scientific tech and medical research publisher. As you can see here, more than 160 online and print journals, many with significant impact factors. They're hybrid and open access journals as well. Online and print books, a large selection of those, member of COPE and listed in all major indexes. And if you are a librarian or a library sciences manager, then you can click the QR code on this screen and get a completely free trial of the full Bentham selection for your library or institution. There's no obligation, there's no costs or fees. It's completely stress-free. So click the QR code, reach out to the Bentham team, and they will set up your institution with a completely free and painless free trial.
It's worth doing because lots of people, lots of researchers, lots of librarians are unaware of the great content that Bentham Science does have. So this is a great opportunity, as Scott says. Maybe you have a friend or a colleague who's a library manager, or you'd like to take a screenshot of this QR code and send it on to your institution librarian. A great chance because you'll get free access to all of the Bentham content for 3 months, which means more than 40 impact factor journals where you can look at opportunities to publish your research. So that's how we like to start these events. I think we're almost ready to go, Scott. Are we getting some comments from people in the chat telling us where they're from and all that stuff?
Yeah, we've got guests joining us from all over the world today. And if you are joining us, by the way, from the Americas, thank you. You're probably watching a recording of this now because you're probably fast asleep. But most of our guests are joining us from, looks like the European and African and Southeast Asian time zones. So thanks to everyone joining us live. And if you're watching the recording, welcome to you as well. And Gareth, journal selection is a common pain point for authors. I'm working with an author just now here in Japan, and they are struggling with this issue. Why is it so important to put care into the journal selection process if you're an author?
We're going to talk about that in just a moment in a little bit more detail, but it really, really, really helps to have a journal selected. This is the quickest way to make sure that your research really does make an impact and really gets noticed by other researchers all over the world. So don't just pick a journal that your supervisor has used before. Don't just pick the first journal that sends you an email inviting you to contribute. Let's put time and effort and energy into the journal selection step. We'd love your feedback on this, but we hope that in this event this evening, we're going to be giving you some convincing reasons and tips and tricks as to why and how you can select a great journal for your next article. And we're going to do this before writing. We're going to talk about this in the context of things that you can do before you start writing your paper, as well as before you make that submission. So after you've written the study, right? It's got these two different phases in the research cycle: before writing and then before submitting.
Great. Over to you, Gareth. I'm going to engage with our attendees in the chat. So over to you, Professor.
Fantastic. All right, nice one. Let's get started. Thanks again, everybody, for joining. It's time to talk about things that you can do with journal selection, things that you can think about doing, how you can pick a journal, why you should pick a journal before you write your next paper. So let's begin with that. Let's think about this. Let's get ahead of the game. Let's make sure that we are putting ourselves in the best possible situation for successful publication as a researcher. Now, journal selection, really, really important. And we reckon at SciTrain, working with Bentham Science, that this is one of the most misunderstood areas of the publication cycle. Many researchers don't put much thought, don't put much effort and energy into the journal selection process. But this is important. Do think about this seriously. Do take on board some of the tips and tricks that we're going to talk about in this event today in order that you can use your journal choice to speed up the publication of your paper, maximize the impact of your article, and also putting effort and energy and time into journal selection enables you to select and detect and avoid those fake journals that are out there in the world, partly as a result of the open access publishing model. But we'll come back and we'll talk about that in a moment. Journal selection, really, really important for these reasons. And it's also key to just be aware of how difficult it could be to ensure that your research stands out. Did you know, for example, that in 2023, more than 2 million research articles were published around the world in all different disciplines in English? More than 2 million research articles, 30,000 per month just in the medical and health sciences. So if you publish a paper in a journal that's maybe a little bit less well known or a little bit less, accessible to your researcher peers, perhaps in your field, in your subject area, you aren't going to get the visibility for your research with your research that it deserves. You need to make sure that your paper stands out from all the others. And this is one really important reason why journal selection is a critical first step. But not a lot of researchers do put the time and effort into this, as we'll talk about in a moment. Making sure your research stands out from the crowd. And so, Scott's going to come back now. We're going to run a cheeky little poll just to make sure you've been paying attention so far in this event. How are we doing, Scott? Everybody okay?
Yeah, we're getting some great comments from our guests today, and several of our guests have already published with Bentham journals or books. So thanks everyone for your kind comments. We're going to try a poll here just to see when you believe is the optimum time to select a journal for your paper. So here are three possible answers. When is the best time? Before writing your manuscript, while writing your manuscript, or after writing your manuscript? Let's see what our guests think.
Hmm. If you've been paying attention so far, you won't be getting this one wrong. But let's see what happens. Like, when is the best time? I mean, I know that I always, often used to write up papers and, then I would think, where am I going to publish this? So,
Mhm.
Scott.
Well, none of these answers are completely wrong answers. In fact, there are arguments for any of these, but we feel that the optimum time to select a journal is before or before finishing writing your manuscript. So let's end the poll here and take a look at our guests' answers. And I think most of you guessed correctly. The best time is before writing. Now, again, to be fair, while writing your manuscript, there's an argument for that. You might have portions of your manuscript in place. You might have your experiments run. You might have some of your results and things. So some of your manuscript might already be in place. And it's ideal to have that when you reach out to journals with inquiries. But we don't recommend doing this after writing your manuscript for reasons that Professor Dyke will explain next. So here's the results of our poll. Looks like most of you got this one right. Best time is before writing.
Okay, fantastic. Let me just close that down on my screen. Let's think about why that's a good reason, why that's an argument that we should take forward and think about as researchers. Okay, so the best time to select a journal is before you start to write your manuscript, but why is that? And as Scott mentioned, there's no like hard and fast, right and wrong here, of course. Like, these are just simply recommendations that we make, suggestions that we make at SciTrain, working with Bentham Science to make the process easier for researchers. But let's have a look at a number of reasons why it could be the best strategy for you as a researcher to select a journal before you start to write your paper. This is because every journal is different. Of course they are. What kind of article are you going to be writing? What will its scope be? Who are the audience? Very important. Journals have different audiences. Will the paper be a full-length article? Will it be a letter? Rapid communication, self-evaluate. And one thing that we do recommend strongly to all of our researcher colleagues who attend these training sessions is to talk to colleagues, talk to other people in your department, reach out to other researchers in your network around the world and ask them, where do you think would be a good place for me to send my next article? Have a think about this as you begin the writing process. What kind of paper do you plan to write? And have a look at where leading researchers, key researchers in your subject area, in your field, where are they publishing their papers? Have a look at their websites. Go online, check out where they are publishing, which journals they're using, because this will give you great insights into where successful, highly published, leading international researchers in your field are putting their studies. Great strategy for you to select a journal for your paper. Additional reasons, of course, will include that if you do this early in the process, if you have a look at journals early in the process, you'll get much more information about that journal's aims and scope. You'll learn about the readership, the disciplines, the topics that that journal publishes, as well as the types of articles that they are putting out into their content. You'll also know the guidelines, the general procedures, the peer review process, formatting, the word limits, any issues to do with copyrights, as well, of course, as the use of UK versus US English. Getting a journal targeted early puts you ahead of the game. It means that you're able to answer many of those questions that you're going to have as a researcher about journal selection, which sections to put, how much information to put into the different sections, for example. So reasons to choose a journal early. You'll also want to be maximizing your message. things to know before you start to write your next paper. And we do recommend at SciTrain having a think about this because before you get going, before you start to sit down and put your fingers on the keyboard or start writing your next article, what's the message? What's the key takeaway that you want people reading your paper to come away from that reading experience with? What's the message? Try to write that down in one or two sentences. What's the key takeaway from the article that you plan to write? The key message. Then have a think about the audience. And of course, that is your journal selection. What journal or which journals are you going to use to submit this paper? So message, audience, and structure. The third element of this to have in mind before you get going. Message, audience, and structure. If you forget everything else that we talk about today, please try to have this in mind before you begin your next article. And you'll engage with your mentorship group, with that group of colleagues that you know online in your academic network, asking them and sharing with them your ideas about where to publish your paper. This makes sure that international colleagues are aware of you and your work. And of course, another great way to do this and get visibility for your study before journal submission or before submission and peer review is to consider the use of preprint platforms. We'll come back and we'll talk about that in a moment. But communication is key. You've got an idea, you may have some results. Let's get into the habit of writing to journal editors before you begin the writing process, communicating with journal editors, reaching out to them and asking them with a short covering message, with a short pre-submission inquiry, as we like to call it. Would it be a good idea for me to send my paper that I'm working on to your journal? Really important. Higher impact factor articles, higher impact factor journals, I should say, encourage this. But there's no reason why you can't always use this technique. Pre-submission inquiries are a really great way to get ahead of the game, right, Scott? Getting into the mind of editors before beginning the submission process.
Yeah, this is something I've learned from you, Gareth, from your experience as an editor. I'm working with an author right now, and she's doing excellent work, pediatric oncology, children's cancer, very important work with the potential to help patients around the world, kids with cancer. You can't get any more important than that. And she's shopping around for a journal, obviously wants to make the best possible impact with her research and her paper. And yeah, I did suggest to her, why not send a couple of pre-submission inquiries? And she said, oh, what is that? I said, basically, it's just an email. You just email some journal editors. And when you frame it that way, pre-submission inquiry sounds a bit fancy, but if you just frame it as, I'm going to reach out to some editors, choose 3 to 5 journals that you think are suitable, and just send them an email and say, this is the work we're doing. Would you be interested? And her reply was, I don't really want to bother anyone. You're a journal editor, Gareth. Does it bother you when someone emails you to ask if you'd be interested in publishing their research?
No, it's in fact, it's something that editors really love to have because the problem is dealing with papers that, they don't know much about potentially. Do they send them out for peer review? Is this something that I need to spend a lot of time on as an editor? So getting those pre-submission inquiries in advance is fantastic because it helps to make those early decisions. Is this work, this pediatric oncology paper, going to be something that should be suitable for the journal? And the editors will reply. I hope that they have replied to your colleague there in Japan, Scott. They should, I hope, get back and say yes or no, or maybe there's another journal in the family that would be potentially interesting as well.
Yeah, she's just sending some inquiries out now. So, and as some of our guests mentioned in the chat, it's great to know the aims and scope of journals before you submit and completely reformat your paper for them. So, yeah. So, back to you, Gareth. Just wanted to interject and
That's
share a
awesome.
real
It
world
is
case.
absolutely fantastic because what we love to hear about at SciTrain are how the things, the tips, the tricks that we've shared with researchers are actually making a difference and helping people. So if you've heard something in this event or one of our other events, perhaps with Bentham Science, and you'd like to let us know, did you think it was good advice? Did you think it was not such good advice? Do get in touch because at the end of the day, as a researcher, you are out there maximizing your impact and thinking about the different kinds of research impact that your work has, not just academic. It's important to get into the mindset of thinking about the economic and societal benefits of your research as well, how your research is making a difference to the lives of ordinary people, as well as citations, as well as academic impact. So let's have a think about the different kinds of research impact and how you can maximize that with your research. Very, very important and part of the journal selection process. So if you're thinking about where to submit, aim high. Go to journals with bigger reputations in your field, of course, first. But if you're not sure if your article is good enough for a particular journal, if you're not sure that the journal is too good for your paper, have a look at this checklist which we put together, which will help you to critically evaluate your work. How novel is your paper within known contexts? Big journals with high impact factors are looking for novel research with good methods, of course. The number one reason why research does tend to face problems in the peer review process is issues with the methods. So have a think about that. Talk to your colleagues about your methods. Can they reproduce everything that you've done? Have you minimized bias? What are the real world implications, the influence of your study? Is it ethically compliant? And is your writing highly readable and so suitable for non-specialist readers? Great ways to think about your research, ways to self-evaluate when targeting your paper to a particular journal. So returning to the subject of what I'm calling pre-submission inquiries, a fancy name for an email to the editor. Scott, let's do a poll.
Okay, let's try another poll. This is a question that authors often misunderstand. So we know that, well, let's just launch the poll and then we'll talk about it afterwards. So excuse me, how many pre-submission inquiries can you send to journals at a time? One at a time, up to three, or unlimited? Let's see what our audience thinks.
Early stage emails to editors at your journals, asking them if this would be something that they would be interested in potentially peer reviewing for publication in their journal. It can be as short as that. You might have a figure, you might have some results, you might just have the idea, maybe a title in your mind. But at the earliest stage possible, it's a good idea to start thinking about where you could publish this, Scott.
And as some of our guests already commented in the chat, you might also have recently been rejected by another journal. So now you do have a complete manuscript and you're shopping that around to other journals. So of course you'd have to find out their aims and scopes and their formatting and so on, and then adjust your manuscript for that. So you might already have a complete manuscript if you've just been rejected.
Absolutely, absolutely. Don't forget, you can use a range of AI tools to help you with manuscript reformatting. Scott knows much more about that than me. We have some recordings on that topic. But in the old days, I used to spend days reformatting papers for resubmission to different journals. That doesn't have to happen anymore either.
Sure, it does still take some work and care, but we do have tools to help us. AI tools can help a lot with that, especially with reformatting and changing your citations and so on. Let's take a look at our results of the poll. The correct answer here, Gareth, how many pre-submission emails can you send?
It's unlimited. You can send as many as you like. And I'm really interested in the results of this poll because it's pretty much split 30% down the middle in this response that we've gotten this evening, Scott.
Right, and I think I can see why from the comments. I think one reason is that as authors, most authors understand that ethically we can only submit to one journal at a time, and that's a hard ethical rule. So maybe some of that is kind of working its way into this. Another factor is that, as some of our guests commented in the chat, perhaps authors feel a little bit shy or hesitant to reach out because we don't want to bother editors. But the fact is, if you're sending out, even if you send out a number of pre-submission inquiries, you're only sending one inquiry. A brief, polite email to an editor is not going to disturb the other editors that you're writing to. You're just trying to get a sense of who might be interested in your paper. Does your paper match the aims and scope of that journal and so on? So there's nothing wrong with sending multiple inquiries to multiple editors, is there, Gareth?
No, no, I think it's a very good strategy because if you have a list of, let's say, 10 or 15 possible journals, do send an email to the editors. Some of them may not reply. Some of them may say, no, this is not interesting. Some of them may reply positively, though, or indeed give you a different journal within the same portfolio that you could look at as a submitting author. And this is good because it gets you ahead of the game. It puts you in the mind of that editor, especially if he or she says, yes, send us this paper. When you do make the submission, you are going to be in their mind when the paper comes in to the journal. So we do have an email template for this. We'll send this to you at the end of the event, along with the certificate and the recording within 24 hours or so after the event. But this is really key. You can write to as many editors as you like. This helps with target journal selection, and you give the abstract, you give the title if you have it, get involved with that. As much information as you have, send to the editor. And as we've mentioned before, this will help you to select that target journal. So what we've done so far in this event this evening is give you a few tips and tricks selecting a target journal before writing your paper. Let's move on now and talk about before the submission stage. What to do before you're ready to make that journal submission in terms of journal selection and understanding the different kinds of journals that are out there in the world today, because there are about 60,000 English language journals in the world. So a big pool, as we looked at earlier. 2 million papers published in 2023. With the rise of AI and all of those associated factors, it's going to be a lot more in 2025, 2026, maybe even as many as twice that original number. But authors, controlled by their funding agencies, controlled by their university assessment criteria, are looking for a number of key elements when selecting a journal. The impact factor, the journal's reputation, how well known is the journal within the field, its reach within the field as well, and is it open access or not, which is a whole kettle of fish that we'll talk about in a moment. But really, the effective journal selection here is a marriage between research and publication. Elements to look for when selecting a journal: impact factor, reputation, reach within the field, and open access. And this grouping of factors is what most researchers keep in mind, take into account when picking that journal. So journal merits. We're looking for a journal that's going to publish as fast as possible. We're looking for a journal with a decent impact factor, of course. And we're looking for a journal with high reach and readership. So when we publish, we try to find a balance, usually between these three elements. Time. We want to know how long it's going to take for the paper to get published. And this information should be available on the journal website. If it's not, then you need to ask the editor for this information. What about the impact factor? High reach and wide readership. We've put together a list of elements here that we think are important to researchers, including the aims and scope, the article type, the length, the publication speed, the frequency, the indexing, rank, impact factor. Is the journal available online? Is it still being printed? And what's the acceptance rate? What criteria does the journal have for publication? Have a look at these checklists, have a listen back to our recording. Which of these factors is most important for you? And of course, we'll be around after the presentation to answer any questions that you may have about journal selection and journal impact factor and things like that. But we have summarized here for you key journal indicators, the different statistics, the different metrics that different journals have in terms of how they measure their performance: the impact factor, the site score, the IPP, the SNP, the eigenfactor, perhaps you've heard of the H index, and SCIMAGO, coordinate statistics here as well. Probably the most important, the most well-known of these are the impact factor as well as the H index, shown here on the slide. We'll talk about what those mean a little bit more in a moment, but these are the key indicators that researchers, universities, and funding agencies are using to assess researchers. Is it a good thing? I'm not sure, but this is a reality of life in academia at the moment. We also, in this event today, wanted to talk a little bit about the different kinds of journals out there in the world, 60,000 or so in English publishing around the world, around 200,000 in total around the world publishing in all different languages. The different kinds of journals that we have access to as researchers is not such an obvious question. You'll be aware probably of traditional journals, subscription journals. You make a submission, paper gets peer reviewed, paper gets sent back to you for revisions, it gets accepted, hopefully, congratulations. But not everybody in the world, in different universities, research institutions, has access to that content because it's paywalled, it's a subscription journal. We call these traditional journals. It's free for you to publish in them, but the big downside is that not everybody is going to have access to that content wherever they are in the world. You publish for free. The content is then sold back to universities and libraries. It's behind a paywall. We've all published in these journals. Some colleagues cannot access our papers. On the other hand, we have fully open access, gold open access, where you publish your paper in an open access journal. It goes online immediately after acceptance, but you've got to pay an article processing charge. That fee for open access publishing is there. So you should be aware of this. We call this model gold open access. The content is available to everybody. We've considered these journals. Many researchers like these journals, but there's the cost involved. How can I afford to pay? People often ask. And of course, this business model as well has led to the rise in predatory publishers, journals that are really only out there and interested in taking your money. There's a third model too. We call this green open access. That's where you go to a traditional journal in that route, but you're allowed to put your content, you're allowed to put your final accepted PDF or Word document, not the final published version, but the final accepted version, onto an institutional repository or a site like ResearchGate or academia. So you're putting your work out there openly, but it's not the final published version, the final typeset published version that the publisher has access to. So anyway, any questions about this? We'd be delighted to answer them at the end of our event. But let's have a quick think now about pre-printing, and we'll talk about what that means in a moment. But this is another great way to share your research with the world, right, Scott?
Great. And before we launch this poll, Dr. Dyke, maybe it's worth defining what preprints and what preprint servers actually are. This is a question we often get from authors. So what, in basic terms, is a preprint server, Dr. Dyke? And can you explain that in a sentence or two?
It's a website where you can put as yet unpeer-reviewed and unpublished research up out there in the community for everybody to look at. So it's a place where you can share your as yet unpeer-reviewed and unpublished research with the world, to get comments, to get feedback, and to share the work with everybody. It wasn't a one sentence answer, but hopefully that helps. Scott?
That helps a lot. And that leads us to our poll because a lot of authors ask us, well, if I'm putting my work out there on a preprint server, what copyrights do authors actually keep when you post on a preprint server? So let's launch the poll here. Which copyrights do you keep? Just launch the poll. Okay. Having some issues launching here. Let me try that again. Okay, let's try the poll. What copyrights do you keep when you publish on a preprint server? Is it all copyrights? A. Is it B, some copyrights? Or C, you give up all your copyrights when you post on a preprint server?
This is a
Let's see
really
what our guests
important
think.
issue. Sorry to interrupt. This is a really important issue and something that many researchers are not aware of. When you publish a paper in a journal, you may not be retaining your own copyright. So this is really important. What does that mean? Well, it means that the publisher may take the commercial rights to your content and use it in the future, Scott. Preprinting is great, isn't it?
It's something we get a lot of questions from authors about. So let's check our poll results here and we'll check the correct answer. And then Dr. Dyke, tell us what the answers mean. So here we go. Looks like our answers are fairly split, but most of our guests believe that you can keep all the copyrights when you publish on our preprint server. Is that correct, Gareth?
It is, yeah. I mean, you're protected by what we call a Creative Commons license, which is stamped electronically onto the preprint once it's published on the preprint platform. So Archive, eLife, Research Square. There are many, many, many preprint platforms, Archive and Research Square being probably the most famous, the largest. You put something up there, it gets stamped with a Creative Commons license. You have the copyright, it's protected, and this is a great thing to know about preprint platforms because often people ask us, as Scott mentioned a little bit earlier, won't I get ripped off? Won't I get gazumped? Won't my work get stolen if I put it on a preprint platform? No, 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 no. These are places where you can put research articles out there, show them to the public, show them to your research community before they get peer reviewed and published in a journal. Author concerns about preprint platforms include copyright, priority, but as we've just discussed, there are things called CC licenses that protect your work from any intellectual theft. So you're actually better off pre-printing your work than just, for example, going to a conference and talking about it openly with your research community, because then you are sharing results, you are sharing research with the community, and you may get into issues with people taking that on board and going off and doing the work. Also, journals select from preprint platforms. So it's a great way not just to get feedback early on your work, but also, get journals potentially interested in publishing your paper. So this is all part of open access publishing, which itself is part of the open science movement. Open access publishing ensures that publications are accessible to everybody. This could include your research, your data, results, conclusions, and sometimes even peer review. And preprinting and open access publishing arguably became most important during the COVID-19 pandemic because rather than waiting for research results to get peer reviewed and published, everybody had access to the latest research earlier, thanks to preprint platforms. We just have to be aware that these are not necessarily peer reviewed papers. So the content that goes up has to be taken with a pinch of salt. So in summary, open access publishing, gold, you're publishing in a fully open access journal, Public Library of Science, PLOS, Frontiers, MDPI, journals like that now offer, traditional publishers like Bentham offer hybrid options. So you can flip one of the Bentham hybrid journals into full open access by paying that article processing charge. And do get in touch with the team at Bentham because depending upon where you are in the world, you may have access without charge to Bentham Science article publication in fully gold OA because of a license that's already been negotiated with your institution or with your local library consortium or with your government. And for that reason, it's a great idea to share that library QR code that we looked at the beginning of our event today, as opposed to green open access, where you're putting your late stage research article after acceptance, not the final published version, but the late stage accepted version, onto a repository like ResearchGate, for example. So we've got some rules for journal selection. We would always say that you should aim high. Look at the websites of other successful researchers publishing in your field. Aim high with your articles. Go high. You're going to get rejected, of course, but that's part of life as an academic. And we have other events on communication, other events on managing and dealing with rejection as you choose appropriately and learn to sell and manage your submissions through the article publication process. So aim high, choose appropriately, and let's learn to sell and manage our submissions. What about some tips for spotting predatory journals, Scott? Or do you want to say a few things about the journal rules for submission?
I just wanted to jump back to that previous slide if we could. Yes, I think rule one and rule two are kind of complementary, if I'm not mistaken. Aiming high means obviously aiming for the best possible journal and the best possible readership and the widest possible readership, the best possible impact factor, and so on, and all the factors that you mentioned earlier, Dr. Dyke. But also choosing appropriately means having an appropriate critical evaluation of our own work and then selecting a journal that's appropriate for our paper or our research. So I feel like those two kind of play off each other.
They do, absolutely. We kind of call this the pirate code because it's not really rules, it's more like guidelines, but you should be going
Exactly.
for higher impact factor papers. Look at where strong, leading international researchers in your field are publishing their work. But watch out for fake journals. We see a lot of this too, don't we, Scott? Like emails that come flooding in, inviting us to submit, but it's not really a great choice.
They're getting more and more sophisticated all the time. They look more and more like legitimate journals. It used to be that they were, more easily identifiable by the websites. You could find some of those telltale signs. Now they're getting more and more copycat sophisticated. But there are some points that you can check for, as you're about to explain, I think, Gareth.
Absolutely. These open access journals are predatory, many of them, because of the open access publishing model. So you need to be really careful that the journal that's emailed you or the journal that you've decided to make your submission to as an open access journal is really a good choice. So have a look at this because it can be quite difficult to spot the difference. And what we've done is we've put together some red flags for you here. The website. Is it indexed? Who's on the editorial board? How regularly is the journal publishing? This is also very important. Are the articles being published being properly peer reviewed or do they match with the aims and scope of the journals? What about fees? Is the publisher, is the journal that you've selected charging a submission fee? That's a big red flag. Or it charges you a fee if you withdraw your paper. Also, a big red flag. And also sending those spam emails full of promises, another red flag as well. So here we've got some ticks. The good journals, the good open access journals should be listed in COPE, DOAJ, OASPA, these big open access journal databases. The journal must have a robust peer review process. The fees and policies should be fair, clearly listed and explained in detail. We've got some great websites here for you to have a look at. Think, Check, Submit, publicationethics.org, the website of the Committee on Publication Ethics, as well as the DOAJ, the DOAJ, the Directory of Open Access Journals.org, and OASPA. So have a look at these resources. Great places to start if you're checking out a journal. But do spend the time, do go in and do this. And take a look, but necessarily don't really believe everything that you read about Beale's list. This was a list of supposedly predatory open access journals that was put together by the University of Colorado librarian Jeffrey Beale in the 1990s and 2000s. It was shut down in 2007 because of complaints and threats of legal action from several publishers. And some publishers got frozen in time on this list. So it's still used by researchers, but we think potentially inaccurately because it's frozen in time from 2017. But nevertheless, let's be aware of it. Let's also be aware of gift and ghost authorships. Ghost authorships are where someone who does lots of work on the paper is not included as an author. For example, if you pay somebody to write the paper for you, this is unethical. A gift authorship as well. This is where someone who did not contribute much or anything to an article is included as an author, like your boss, the director of a research group or institute. It's common, especially in papers written by early career researchers. But is it ethical? Have a look at the ICMJE, the International Committee Medical Journal Editors Guidelines. What constitutes authorship? And critically, as we'll talk about, I'm sure, in the Q&A in a moment, decide and agree who is an author on your paper and the order of that authorship before you begin to write. Pick a journal before you start. Decide on the authorship before you get going, which brings us to the Q&A section of our event today. Let me just briefly summarize. We've talked about what you can do in terms of journal selection before you start to write. And we've also talked about what you can do before you submit your paper to a journal. Scott, how are we doing? Have we got some questions, some comments from our audience this evening?
We've got some great comments and some very thoughtful questions from our guests today, and I'm happy we have some time to address some of these questions. I've put a number of links to some of the resources that Dr. Dyke mentioned. They're in the chat there. You can also review these when you watch the recording. We'll be sending you a link to the full recording and the full chat, and all the links will be included in there. So if you missed any links during the event today, don't worry. You can always review tomorrow. We'll send that 24 hours after the event finishes. So in about a day, check your inbox and we'll send you a link to everything, the full event. We're also going to share with you Dr. Dyke's pre-submission inquiry email template. It's just basically a Word document. You can open that, you can copy and paste that into an email, change the details, and send it to that journal that you might be interested in, or several journals, or as many journals as you like, as we learned today. So we'll send you that pre-submission inquiry email template around this time tomorrow, along with your certificate and the full recording. So for those who asked, we'll send that out to you tomorrow.
It is important, by the way, to make sure that you do what Scott suggests. If you're sending a submission, a cover letter, or a pre-submission inquiry, make sure you change the name of the journal. So do put that effort in because that can really stymie your relationship with a journal editor if you haven't edited the name. If you get rejected and you don't change the name and you send another cover letter or pre-submission inquiry, could be a bad move.
Right? As an editor, Gareth, you might feel a bit insulted if someone doesn't write your name correctly or the name of your journal correctly. So be careful when you're sending those inquiries or cover letters to make sure that you get the journal's name correct and the editor's name correct. If you don't know the editor's name, you can always just say, Dear something something journal editors. That's fine. Great questions coming. Let's see. One of our guests asks, how can we be sure about predatory conferences? Oh, excellent. Excellent question. That's great. I'm going to put a link into the chat window here. So Gareth mentioned earlier, Think, Check, Submit for submitting to journals. There's also a similar site called thinkcheckattend.org. I just put the link into the chat there. And you can check if that conference you might be interested in is legitimate or predatory. There are more and more predatory conferences out there. So best to be careful. Thank you for your questions so much. There's a link there in the chat, thinkcheckattend.org. Great question. Thank you for that. Okay, another one of our guests asks, what are the key formatting requirements of a journal that need to be carefully checked before submission? Well, that's a great question. So obviously it's specific to each journal, but there are probably some general tips and guidelines we can look for, aren't there, Gareth? What are some of the common
Yeah.
formatting things that you need to change when if you're maybe you're rejected by one journal, you want to resubmit that manuscript to another? What are some of the key things you need to look for formatting wise for resubmitting?
It depends on the journal, as you mentioned, Scott, but you really do need to check the journal guidelines, not just the aims and scope, but also the formatting guidelines, because they may be specifying certain subheadings. They may be asking for the paper to be submitted in a certain format, like LaTeX or PDF. For example, they may want line numbers on the manuscript to facilitate the peer reviewers' work. They might want the figures in certain formats, maybe at the end of the document, organized like that. So do this because what happens when papers go to journals, submitted to journals, is there's a first stage triage check that's carried out often by companies working for publishers or by the publishers themselves. And if your paper's in the wrong format, as specified on the website, so that will be a big black mark for you on the initial checklist, you're going to get rejected. The paper's going to come back to you. It's going to take more time to turn it around. So these are tricks to have in mind. If you know something about how journals run their processes, you can speed this up for yourself as an author. So I would say check the journal, not just the aims and scope, but also the formatting guidelines as well. Great question. Thank you for that.
Great question. And as Gareth mentioned earlier, there are AI tools that can help us with some of the more troubling reformatting tasks, like reformatting your citations and so on. There's some great tools to help you with those. Abstracts can also have different formatting requirements as well, structured, unstructured, and so on. So, as Gareth says, check the journal requirements carefully. Great question. Thank you. Excellent question. Let's see. One of our guests commented that there are some risks to choosing a journal before writing your paper. I didn't see the specific risks there, but Gareth, as we mentioned earlier, it's not a hard rule. We do suggest selecting a journal first before writing or completing your manuscript. You get the journal's aims and scope, you get their formatting requirements, and so on. But obviously, it's not a perfect solution in all cases. But we do find it's probably the best approach to choose the journal first before finalizing or writing your manuscript. So thanks for your comment. And yeah, we realize that these are not hard, fast rules. There are definitely exceptions. So thanks for your comment. If you have any other questions, you feel free to share them in the Q&A box. We've got a question from our guest here. It says, how do I navigate the complexities of adapting a manuscript for publication while ensuring that the revisions and edits made do not compromise the original research findings or dilute the intellectual rigor? This is such a good question, and I'm sure we can't give you a simple cure-all answer, but it's an excellent question. This is a reality. You
Mhm.
submit to a journal, you may be rejected, you need to shop around, you need to reformat and change that manuscript, sometimes change word counts, change some of even the structure of the paper in some cases. Gareth, you've published a number of papers. Um, any thoughts for Victor here on this question? How do you,
Wow.
as an author, manage that very complex task of adapting a paper that's already been submitted and rejected for the next journal? Do you have any approaches or suggestions
Oh,
for that?
it's a great question, Victor. I love this question. What we used to do when I was working as an academic is develop like a mental cascade of journals. So not from within the same publisher. Publishers use that term as well to refer to their different journals. But for example, you might submit your paper or your research preferentially to your favorite journal, one journal, right? And then if it gets rejected, you might have another journal in mind that has a very similar format and a very similar aims and scope. So you can minimize the amount of work that you have to do to get the paper ready for submission to another journal. That would be one approach. Victor, I think your question also touches on what happens after peer review, because very often what we believe in as researchers in the content of our research gets diluted after peer review. Like a reviewer might ask you to change something, and you may think that in order to get the paper accepted, I'm going to have to make that change. Well, that's not the case. And if you disagree with the comments of a reviewer, the best thing to do is talk to the editor and explain why you're not going to make that change, perhaps in your resubmission cover letter. And we've got other presentations about how to do this. And do check out the Bentham Science webinar website, because maybe we'll do it. We have one of those coming up relatively soon, because you don't need to compromise your research, Victor, in order to get it published. And that's a great question. Thank you so much for it.
It's an excellent question. Really, thanks for posting that, and hopefully some of the information we shared today will be helpful. But it's a very complex task, of course, adapting a paper for resubmission. So thanks for your question, Victor. Another great question from our guest here. What if you've presented your paper at a conference that the paper is not yet published, but others have been published? What do you do? This is a great question. We sometimes get this one. So you're presenting at a conference. How do you protect your work if if your paper is not published? Gareth, any thoughts on what you should do if if you're presenting at a conference a paper that's not yet published or peer reviewed?
Well, the best advice that we would have for you in this situation is to preprint the conference abstract, preprint your slides potentially that you're going to use at the conference. You can do that. That will protect you much more than if you just go to the conference and present a load of as yet unpublished data. Have a look at the conference, whether it's going to be publishing a proceedings volume and where that proceedings volume is going to come out, because that's important too. I mean, you may have more chances of publishing your work in a conference proceedings volume, but let's make sure that where you're publishing is a good venue. It's really the best that your paper deserves, because of course you may be offered the opportunity to publish your paper in a conference proceedings volume, and that might not be the best place for your study. Scott?
Great question. Thank you for that. We've got a few more questions here, Gareth. If we've got a minute more, there's some excellent questions coming in. One of our guests asks the use of AI in writing the research paper. That's a great question. That's something you also should check the journal requirements and guidelines for to find out what amount of AI assisted writing is allowed by that journal. So as Gareth always mentions, check the journal's guidelines and scope carefully before submitting to that journal. If you're using AI extensively in writing your paper, there might be an accepted amount of AI assistance that you can use for particular publishers or journals or book publishers. So check that very carefully first. Again, another great reason why it's good to select a journal early, because that journal might not allow the amount of AI assisted writing that you're using in your
Yeah.
manuscript.
We have some presentations on this as well, so do get in touch with us if that would be interesting to you or your institution. Ethical use of AI in research writing, presentations on the kinds of tools that are out there at the moment that you could use to help you with your journal selection, idea generation, writing the paper, even submitting and managing later stages in the publication process. Do get in touch with us if you'd like to learn more about the kinds of training events that we do at SciTrain in partnership with, in this case, Bentham Science. Scott?
Great. And feel free to click the QR code and get your free trial. One final question here. One of our guests asks if a journal charges APCs, are they a good journal? Just to be clear, just the fact that a journal is charging APC charges to publish open access doesn't mean that they are a predatory journal. Of course, among the subset of open access journals, there are certain journals that are not good. As we mentioned earlier, it's perfectly ethical to charge APCs, but just be careful of journals that charge at submission. So be very careful on that point. Gareth, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, APCs are part of the landscape for publishing these days. And unfortunately, that's led to lots of bad actors who understand that and try to create fake websites, fake journals to trick you out of your money. So be careful. But of course, some of the most reputable, high impact, highest impact open access journals in the world are charging article processing charges. We know it's a huge issue for researchers. We try to push back against it as much as we can, and we do have lots of advice and support for you if you're trying to pick a journal and you need our advice. So do get in touch, do check out scitrain.com, scan the Bentham QR code. Bentham Science has some amazing journals that you may very well wish to have a look at for your next publication. So get access to 3 months free trial on all of the Bentham content. And don't forget to follow Bentham on social media, right, Scott?
Please do. All the links are here, and I'll be sending an email to everyone tomorrow with your pre-submission inquiry template form, your certificate, and a link to the full recording and chat of today's talk. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining. And thank you, as always, Gareth, for sharing your expertise with us.
Fantastic to do these events together, Scott. And have a good evening in Tokyo. And have a good evening to all of our guests joining us today as well. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thanks, everyone, on behalf of Bentham.